Once upon a time, in a bustling office tower in Nairobi, Kenya, a middle-level professional had to give a speech at 3 different events in 1 week. On Monday, he had to speak at his monthly departmental meeting. On Wednesday, he had been invited as the chief guest at a community fundraiser, or what we call Harambee. And on Saturday, he was the MC at his cousin's wedding. He tried memorizing facts and bullet points for each, but each speech fell flatter than a chapati left out in the sun. Why? Because he hadn't learned the art of storytelling. See what I did there? I began with a mini story. That's the hook. Welcome to Convey with Caroline, the podcast where every story becomes your path to powerful communication and personal growth. I'm your host, Caroline Giro, and this is episode 10, where we talk about storytelling. The ultimate way to tie together all the skills we've learned about so far in the previous 9 episodes. Let's dive in. So now back to my professional. He's got a knack for analyzing data and closing deals, but he's been asked to deliver 3 different speeches in the same week. You know, I know a few of us can relate. Sometimes it can get crazy, especially anybody who is into sales or marketing, making presentations one after the other, and you barely have any relief from one before you have to jump into the next one, right? So you have to do several things in this world of a lot of noise and where opportunities are given to the people who are communicating. This is with the advent of social media. So it could be you're a content creator and maybe you've already put up your content for last week, and now you have to get started on what you're going to show this week, and you're wondering, oh my gosh, what am I going to put up? I have to create a video on this, and then I have to do a video on this. You know, at first you think, no problem, I know my stuff. But the moment you start drafting, each speech or each presentation or each content video starts feeling like, you know, it's a bit stiff. You know, it feels formal. You feel like it might not be relatable. You feel your audience might not lead in. And maybe even when you're speaking to them, you realize they're just politely nodding, or some people are just scrolling on their phones. Yeah? Then that's when you realize statistics alone cannot bring these talks to life. You need stories, and stories pull at heartstrings. They spark laughter and they awaken curiosity. You know, so the bottom line is that facts and figures are essential, but they only come alive through narratives. You know, for us who are Africans and even other people from around the world, storytelling is something which is part of us. It has been part of our history for centuries and centuries, long before we had the internet, long before we had PowerPoint slides or social media. Let's take a quick journey back in time. Storytelling is one of humanity's oldest communication tools. Long before the written word, people across African villages, Asian villages around the world, you know, even here in our local context in Kenya, from Lake Victoria to the plains of Rift Valley, you know, gather around fires to hear griots or village elders share the community's past stories and values, right? And we know that in African traditional culture, these stories weren't just for entertainment. They were a way of information, morals, culture, and stories being passed and shaping our identity and unifying us as a people. And we all know how from our grandparents how this was passed along, even through song, through poems, through presentations, through repetition. And most of African languages are very repetitive in nature. When we are talking, we are very repetitive in nature because that's the way people were supposed to remember, because they didn't have books, right? And storytelling is at the heart of everything. And that's why many of us, in fact, I think almost all of us, are natural storytellers. When we meet with our friends or our family members, we are very good at telling stories. Or when you get to work late, you walk into the office and like, guys, you can't believe the traffic out there. You know, guys, when I was crossing the expressway, there was an accident. This car had jumped over the fence to the other side. There was a crowd, the cops were there, and there was this guy who was screaming ABCD, and there were some children on the side, and they were crying for their mummies. And so when people are giving stories informally, they give them very well, very, very well. You know, yesterday, did you guys watch the news? Did you see what the president was saying? I can't believe it. Imagine this guy was looking as, he was dressed looking like this, and he was looking like this. And that's when people bring out the metaphors, they bring out the similes, they bring up the descriptive language, and they're very good at telling stories. But the moment we turn it into a formal setting, Now you have to do the presentation. Now you have to talk in front of an audience. Now you have to write the book. All of a sudden, our natural storytelling techniques go out the window. And this is because sometimes we overthink it and we're not drawing deep into our identities of who we are. In the digital age, we still crave that emotional connection that came from who we are as a people. That personal touch that transforms a mere presentation into a memorable experience, just like was done in our past with our ancestors, and continues to happen even in our homes today. So whether you are addressing, your colleagues at work, your friends at home, you're in a church meeting, a well-told story, it cuts through the noise and resonates on a deeper level. The audience is able to identify who you are. But let's break down some of the key components of effective storytelling. Number one, the hook. The hook is what grabs attention immediately. This is a surprising fact, a vivid image, or even a comedic twist. You can throw in even a knock-knock joke. Knock, knock. Who is there? Amos who? A mosquito. This, it makes you connect with the audience, Start with your departmental update, where you can start with the topmost thing. For example, if it's at work, we overcame 8 challenges this quarter, but wait till you hear the wildest one. That's a hook, So we need to be able to use this type of comedic timing, a joke or a storyline to get the attention through using a hook. Knock, knock, who is there? Anna. Anna who? Another mosquito. So it works. Okay. On a serious note, number 2, conflict and resolution. You need to show the struggle. In all stories that we know, even from our childhood, there's always a conflict introduced. There was Nyakio, the beautiful girl in the village, and she had gone to fetch water using her pot, and she was walking through the forest. And then she had a loud noise, and she turned around, and there was the ogre. Big, huge ogre with 3 eyes, That is what we call a struggle, a conflict. As you're giving your story, there must be something in it where there is a problem. That's what connects with us emotionally. Human beings, we are geared towards hearing a conflict, and then we hear about how it was resolved. And then you end up showing how the story ended, how the ogre ended up being killed, and how some hero appeared and Nyakio lived happily ever after. So you have to show the lesson or the success at the end of the story that you're telling. Number 3, emotional relevance. Here you connect with your audience's values, hopes, or fears. You need to make them feel something. That means you have to study the audience before you appear before them. If it's a public speaking engagement and you've been asked to come to speak to a church, you have to learn what that church's values are so that you're able to align your messaging with who they are. And if you are from the church and you've been asked to go and speak to a professional group, in a conference, for example, you have to align, because if you come with the same type of speech you gave in the church, you lose them immediately because they start wondering, who is this spiritual zealot standing in front of us? So you have to show the real world impact on people's life, and you have to adapt to the audience. Now, number 4, but before I say number 4, here's another knock-knock joke. Knock, knock, who is there? Arthur. Arthur who? A third mosquito. I'm sorry, I know I'm corny, But let me go back to number 4, clarity and structure. Keep it focused, Avoid meandering. I know I meandered there, but avoid meandering and going all over the place, Use straightforward language. I gave a tip in episode 9 on writing and how we can improve our writing. And have a logical flow from start to finish. Why do all these things matter? They matter because human beings remember stories more than bullet points. Stories evoke emotion. They inspire action, and they linger in our minds long after the facts are forgotten. So don't forget to use stories in your communication, right? When it comes to biblical storytelling, there's perhaps no greater master than Jesus Christ himself. He often spoke in parables. In my last episode, I talked about everybody's unique talking and writing style. We talked about Paul and the letters, and now we see Jesus with the parables, where he'd use simple, vivid narratives about everyday life. And these stories captured our attention. I'll give the example of the parable of the Good Samaritan that is in Luke chapter 10, verse 25 to 37, where Jesus was asked by one of the experts in religious law, "Teacher, what must I do to receive eternal life?" And Jesus asked him, "What does the law of Moses say?" And the man answered, "You must love the Lord your God with all of your heart, your soul, your strength, and your mind, and love your neighbor as you love yourself." And he wanted to ask Jesus, "So who is your neighbor in this case?" And instead of Jesus answering in a straightforward way, he used a parable, which is a story. And Jesus gave the parable of the Good Samaritan, where instead of giving a dry lecture on how you should love one's neighbor and how to go about it, instead Jesus told a story. He told a story about the Jewish man who was robbed and left for dead, about the priest and the Levite who passed by without helping him, and how eventually a Samaritan who was an outsider actually showed compassion, nursed the man's wounds, and pays for his care. So whatever he's striving to do has been achieved. Goal done, because you may not remember the lecture, but you will definitely remember the story. And it's a story we are telling until today. Our children are taught about it in Sunday school if you're a Christian. And this is how you tell stories. There are many more stories. If you read the New Testament, there are so many similar stories of how Jesus would be asked a question and would respond with a story, which we are calling parables. So this unexpected twist challenged the prejudice that we have, evoked empathy, and drove home his point of showing mercy to anyone in need, right? The parable's effectiveness lies in the relatable setting that Jesus gave his story in. He gave a story that the people could relate with. The setting was within where they are. He used examples of people that they know, the Levite, the Jewish person, the Samaritan, He showed emotional conflict. There was a problem. This guy needed help. He had been robbed. And there was a clear moral takeaway or lesson. Okay? And for us who are modern day readers, we can still identify with it even centuries later. So sometimes if you're we live in a world where our communities are becoming more and more diverse. Because of traveling, open borders, the internet, you find we are no longer living in communities where maybe you're one tribe, one community. People are traveling and we are in mixed and diverse communities. So it's good to learn storytelling from wide areas so that we are able to also give universal scenarios to be able to tell the story that we're trying to tell or the presentation that we're trying to make. Now, let's translate these storytelling tips into real-world scenarios that you might encounter in your workplace, in school, in your content creation, or even in your book writing. So if you're doing your workplace presentation, remember you always have to understand the organization that you work for, understand the values, the mission statement, so that you communicate within the values of your organization. Always start with a mini anecdote. Remember when our procurement department nearly collapsed last month? Here is how we turned it around, Personalize your data. This is how it affected Sarah in accounting when we did this and why she nearly missed a client deadline. This is how Njoroge, one of our vendors, benefited from our last campaign last month. Personalize it. Two, if you're doing pitching and fundraisers, rather than throwing around statistics at potential donors and drowning them with numbers, share a brief real-life case. Yeah, just talk about Jamila, who quadrupled her produce sales last month due to our sales training. Or talk about Janet, one of the beneficiaries of our menstrual hygiene campaign, or so on and so forth. This humanizes your proposal and tags at the heartstrings of the people that you're speaking to. Number three, for social media platforms, right? Instead of just using the template straight from the AI text generation platforms, try to craft a short behind-the-scenes story about overcoming something that particular week, right? And you can even encourage engagement by asking a question at the end or asking your followers to do something in particular. Number 4, if it's at family or community events, let's say, for example, you're speaking at a wedding toast, or you're giving a youth forum talk, or you've been asked to speak at a family function, you need to embed a relatable story to the audience you're speaking with. You have to learn who these people are and then tell a story from their perspective. You've seen this time and time again, especially from stand-up comedians. Every time a stand-up comedian starts their show, they always start by giving a shout out to the people of that town, you know. So you start the speech and say, hello, Nairobi. Nairobi, you know what I love about Nairobi is, the park. I saw the lions and I'm so excited. I love Nairobi. And you see the same comedian is speaking in Accra. Hello, Accra. I love Accra. Accra is the best city. When I came here and I walked around and went to your marketplace and tasted your rice, there's no competition, guys. That makes it relatable to your audience, even though you're coming from a different place. People bond over shared experiences and emotions. Never forget that. So a pro tip is always ensure that you have a clear takeaway or a moral. Okay? Ensure that there is a call to action or a unifying theme. Don't leave your audience guessing at the end. As we close on episode 10, where we've talked about storytelling for impact, I want you to remember that your story is your power. Sharing it with others, whether in a presentation, on social media, in a boardroom, or even with tea with friends, can shape perspectives, mend bridges and spark dreams. You're poised to communicate in a way that truly resonates, and you're able to find impact. If you found value in this Find Your Voice series, please subscribe and share with those seeking to find or refine their voice. And most importantly, keep practicing. Every chance to tell a story is another step towards deeper connections and meaningful impact. Until next time, remember, the world needs your voice and your stories, so let's convey excellence. Until next time, remember, the world needs your voice and your stories, so let's convey excellence.